On November 1, 1396, St. Paul's Cathedral in London is illuminated by hundreds of flickering candles that dance against the Gothic windows. The organ's sound reverberates through the naves as a royal procession makes its way down the central aisle. However, this is not a typical ceremony, it is the wedding of a 6-year-old child. Isabel of France, the youngest princess in Europe, approaches the altar where Richard II, the King of England, a 29-year-old man, awaits her, adorned in golden silks that trail across the stone floor. The little girl struggles to bear the weight of her delicate crown. In just a few moments, she will be proclaimed Queen of England, solidifying a political alliance that will alter the fate of 2 nations. How did such a young child become the focal point of medieval diplomacy at its most ruthless? To comprehend Isabel's tragic destiny, we must revisit 14th-century France, a kingdom overshadowed by royal madness. Isabel was born on November 9, 1389, at the Louvre Palace, the daughter of Charles VI of France and Isabel of Bavaria. She was the 4th daughter of the royal couple, a princess born into dark times that would define her entire life. Her father, Charles VI, was infamously known as Charles the Mad due to episodes of insanity that had plagued him since the age of 24. During his episodes, the king would fail to recognize his wife or children, believe he was made of glass and would shatter if touched, or would run through the palace halls, screaming that invisible foes were chasing him. France was engulfed in chaos, ruled by regents vying for power while the true king remained imprisoned within his own mind. Isabel's mother, Isabel of Bavaria, she was a highly controversial individual, ambitious and unscrupulous, who exploited her husband's illness to amass power and wealth. The chroniclers of her time characterized her as a dissolute woman who maintained lovers while neglecting her children. For Isabeau of Bavaria, her daughters were seen as valuable assets in the European political arena, intended to forge alliances through arranged marriages. Little Isabel was raised in this toxic atmosphere, surrounded by palace intrigues and political turmoil. France was ravaged by the 100 Years' War against England, by conflicts between the Armagnacs and Burgundians, and by the repercussions of royal madness. For a sensitive child, witnessing her father's crisis and her mother's calculating coldness resulted in traumas that would follow her throughout her life. In 1396, when Isabel was merely 6 years old, a diplomatic opportunity emerged that would alter her fate forever. Richard II of England, after years of conflict with France, sought peace to strengthen his internal power. Having lost his first wife, Anne of Bohemia, he required a new matrimonial alliance that would ensure political and financial stability. The French advisors, led by the Duke of Berry, recognized the English request as a golden opportunity. They proposed the marriage between Isabel and Richard, offering a staggering dowry of £800,000 and a 28-year truce for France, which was financially crippled by war. It was an irresistible chance to purchase peace at the expense of a child. The negotiations extended over several months and were conducted with the detachment of commercial transactions. French and English ambassadors deliberated the terms as if Isabel were livestock being sold at a market, her youth deemed exceedingly young even by medieval standards. The standards surrounding the matter were a topic of contention. Some English counselors contended that it would be prudent to postpone the marriage until she reached the age of 12, which was deemed appropriate for the consummation of matrimony. However, Richard II was in a state of desperation. He was confronted with internal rebellions, severe financial difficulties, and the ongoing risk of deposition. The acquisition of French funds and the establishment of external peace took precedence over concerns regarding the bride's age. In October 1396, the terms were ultimately finalized. Isabel of France was to be sent to England as a political offering, a child sacrificed on the altar of royal diplomacy. Isabel's departure from her French family was a carefully staged event designed to leave a lasting impression on the English ambassadors at the Louvre Palace. Charles VI, in one of his rare moments of clarity, wept as he blessed his young daughter. In contrast, Isabel of Bavaria exhibited her usual emotional detachment, viewing the separation as a successful business transaction. Little Isabel did not fully grasp the gravity of the situation. For her, the journey to England was merely an adventure, perhaps a temporary one. She brought along only a few toys, her cherished dolls, and a small pet dog that had been her companion at the Louvre. The French entourage accompanying her consisted of hundreds of nobles, servants, and a special guard assigned to safeguard the precious cargo being transported. The journey from Calais to London took several days, Weeks passed, marked by extravagant ceremonies in every English city they traversed. Local authorities vied to host the most lavish receptions for the future queen. However, Isabel, feeling exhausted and overwhelmed by the excessive display, often wept and requested to return home. In London, Richard II orchestrated a wedding that would rival any royal ceremony of the time. St. Paul's Cathedral was adorned with a blend of French and English fabrics, symbolizing the union of the two kingdoms. Thousands of candles, imported from France, illuminated the surroundings as choirs sang in Latin and French. This spectacle was crafted not only to dazzle the subjects but also to showcase to the world that England had attained peace through diplomacy. Richard II himself appeared as a reluctant yet resolute groom. At 29, he was regarded as one of the most cultured men in Europe, a patron of the arts and literature. He had deeply cherished his first wife, and the thought of marrying a child left him visibly uncomfortable. Nevertheless, political imperatives took precedence over personal feelings. During the ceremony, Isabel remained silent, clearly daunted by the magnificence of the occasion. The Archbishop of Canterbury had to kneel to place the ring on her small finger while she scanned the crowd for familiar faces that were no longer present. When she was proclaimed Queen of England, she exhibited no joy, only confusion and increasing trepidation. Initially, Isabel's life at the English court was safeguarded by her youth. Richard II, to his credit, treated her more like a daughter than a spouse, providing her with French tutors, allowing her to preserve her native customs and ensuring she, Isabel, raised with royal dignity, was granted her own quarters at Westminster Palace, complete with a manor house and servants dedicated solely to her well-being. However, the child queen's joy was violently disrupted in September 1399 when Richard II, confronted by a rebellion led by Henry Bolingbroke, was deposed and later murdered at Pontefract Castle. At just 10 years old, Isabel became a widow without ever having truly been a wife. Richard's death posed a political conundrum for England. Although Isabel was a legitimate queen, her marriage had never been consummated, leaving her without heirs. To make matters worse, the £800,000 dowry had already been exhausted, and returning her to France would necessitate the return of funds that no longer existed. Henry IV, the new King of England, initially sought to keep Isabel as a valuable captive, hoping to leverage her in future negotiations with France. The young widow was held in comfortable confinement at Havering Castle, where she spent 3 years striving for her freedom. Her desperate letters to French relatives reveal a girl who had matured prematurely through suffering. In one of her letters to her father, she wrote, "I write to you in tears, for I am kept here like a prisoner, far from all I love, without hope of return." Her heartfelt pleas eventually moved Charles VI, who, in a moment of clarity, firmly demanded the return of his daughter. After extensive diplomatic negotiations, Isabel finally returned to France in 1401. However, the girl who had departed Paris at the age of 6 had transformed into a 12-year-old, prematurely aged by her traumatic experiences. The return to the Louvre did not yield the anticipated joy. France remained engulfed in chaos, and her family regarded her more as a political liability than as a cherished daughter. However, Isabel's tragedy was far from over. In 1405, at the age of 16, she was once again utilized as a pawn in political dealings when her mother orchestrated her second marriage to Charles of Orleans, a young French poet and nobleman. This time, however, Isabel attained something that had been denied to her in her youth: a marriage founded on mutual affection. Charles of Orleans was sensitive, intellectual, and genuinely in love with Isabel. The couple discovered happiness in the realms of art and poetry, and their love thrived despite the political turmoil surrounding their union. For the first time, Isabel experienced what it meant to be loved for her true self, rather than for her worth as a bargaining chip. Yet, this happiness was fleeting. In 1407, Charles was captured by the English at the Battle of Agincourt and spent 25 years imprisoned in England. Isabel, once again a widow in practice, returned to a life of solitude and reliance on the French royal family. Life had robbed her twice of the chance to love and be loved. In the years that followed, Isabel lived quietly at the French court, dedicating herself to charitable endeavors and the arts. Her experience as England's child queen had provided her with a unique insight into politics and diplomacy, knowledge she discreetly employed to counsel other members of the royal family. In 1409, Isabel gave birth to her only daughter, Joan of Orleans, a child who would grow up without ever knowing her father. Motherhood offered her some solace, but it also carried the bitter irony of knowing that her own daughter would likely encounter a similar fate, utilized as a political tool in arranged marriages. Isabel of France passed away in 1409 at the age of 20 due to postpartum complications. Her existence was completely governed by the political demands of others, having been sacrificed at the age of 6 in a diplomatic union, widowed at 10, imprisoned at 12, remarried at 16 for political expediency, and left a practical widow at 18 when her second spouse was captured. Her death went largely unnoticed by the chroniclers of her time, starkly contrasting the grandeur that accompanied her first wedding. Isabel of France had executed her role as a political pawn by producing an heir and solidifying alliances, yet she was never afforded the chance to live for her own sake. Isabel's narrative prompts significant inquiries regarding the status of women in medieval politics and the human cost of royal diplomacy. Her experience exemplifies how children, particularly noble girls, were regarded as transferable assets between kingdoms, their lives entirely subjugated to the political ambitions of their parents and husbands. More than 6 centuries later, the tragedy of Isabella of France continues to echo as a grim reminder of the atrocities of child marriage and the commodification of children for political ends. Her story compels us to confront uncomfortable realities about how entire lives were manipulated for political gain. Societies can normalize the sacrifice of innocence for the sake of greater interests. The child princess, who was offered as a political gift, never truly experienced a childhood. From the age of 6, she bore state responsibilities that should have been assigned to adults. Her existence was a continuous offering to the deities of medieval politics, a cost incurred for temporary peace between rival nations. Isabel of France stands as an everlasting emblem of childhood vulnerability in the face of unchecked political power. Her legacy serves as a reminder that behind every diplomatic treaty, royal alliance, and political marriage throughout history there often existed children whose lives were irrevocably altered to fulfill the ambitions of the powerful. The girl who ascended to the throne at 6 paid the ultimate price for peace between France and England, her own happiness and, ultimately, her life.